So on page 62, you guys talk about de-stressing together. And this principle fits well in the things we've talked about and to our listeners and in the materials that we use. We use a lot of Dr. Wilder's material. And one of his premises, peace and quieting. It's a joy. It's a joy rest cycle. Goes along with attachment and love, joy. I mean, you watch any parent play with their child, you'll see that the child is excited, and that lasts for 10, 15 seconds. And I'm speaking really of an infant kind of thing here. But then you don't keep that child in an uber excited state for like 30 straight minutes, right? You give them a chance to calm and quiet. So if you think through that cycle, what did that look like for you guys as you're working yourself back out to learn de-stressing, but not also to stay uber excited in your excitement? I mean, there's got to be that joy rest. I mean, everybody wants to do something really fun and then maybe just go read a book or what did that look like?
Yeah, for us, that we're better at it now than we were in the moments of when it was the highest stress. But for us, it really came down to finding time for ourselves and for our marriage and kind of putting a priority on that at different points. So what it looks like for ourselves in de-stressing is we would take time to allow our spouse to do something that they enjoyed or to get away and to do, even if it was for 5 or 10 minutes. In reality, sometimes 5 or 10 minutes is a struggle to find in our lives and how busy it gets when it's at the worst. But time to go out and say, hey, honey, I've got to go out for a run. I'll go for 10 minutes. I know I don't have any more time than that, but I need something just to get out and do something. Or I'd say to Kristin, go work on, go journal some or go do something like that and spend some time. So we gave each other a gift of being able to get away to de-stress. And on the other side of that, we had to accept that gift. It's easy to sit there and say, oh no, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to keep doing this and help out. And I want to be a part of this. We had to learn to take that gift, that we didn't have to be there all the time, that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even an hour sometimes, we could get away and do something for ourselves to kind of de-stress and reinvigorate ourselves, and then come back a little bit stronger. So we had on the individual level, but then we also had on a level as a couple, and we had to find ways to do that. For us, we had a very early bedtime for our kids, that we just said, look, you got to go to bed, for our oldest, and probably an earlier bedtime than his peers would have had, 8 or 8:30 even, most nights, even into the teenage years, because we had to have that time at night where we could finish getting all the work done, set up feeding bags, doing medicines, kind of winding down the house, and we'd have enough time to come and watch a few minutes of a show together, to watch a late night comedy show, for instance, where we could laugh, and add that to our life. It was so stressful. We needed those moments. So we had to find in the small pieces of how to do that, and come together as a couple. But then also we had to think about the bigger picture. And, this was a couple years into the process of kind of rebuilding our marriage. We said we have to have time away as well. These individual moments at the house, little bits here and there are great. They help sustain us, but we have to have some focus time beyond that, whether that's an hour or whether that's getting away for a couple nights. We have to find a way to do this. It's so important and a priority. It's in our pack. We have to do it or we're not going to survive. And we've got to find ways creatively to do it. And so that's really the other piece that we had to build into our marriage.
What would you add to that, Kristin, in de-stressing together? Because you mentioned that, there was a time you were kind of in grief alone, and then you can be like in stress alone too. So Todd kind of gave his perspective, and what are other things you would add? Because this is still about emotional support and doing it together. Like you've definitely made a great point that sometimes we need our alone time and we need our refreshing time. But sometimes in a special needs marriage and family system, we can almost become too siloed and too independent, well, the only way it's going to work is you take yours and you take yours. And this priority that Todd was mentioning on, doing some of these things together. So what are some things that de-stressing looked like for you?
I'm going to take a more nerdy side. From what I learned in my extensive research and through my clinical training and my master's degree, we were in the chronic stress cycle. The chronic stressors, our stress response systems were just chronically activated. And as we know, that can change neurological wiring, chemical stress hormones. And so what I learned was we had to start resolving that system, and on different levels. We had to do it, as Todd said, individually. But in order to connect with one another emotionally, one of the ways that we started to do that was through practicing mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction. And that began to calm that emotional fear parts of the brain so that we could really connect on a deeper level in the present moment. And so some of the things we do are just takes 1 minute a day, deep breathing together. And even a hug where we do that, or taking a eucalyptus shower together, and just things that help relax our bodies, and getting away together for a couple nights, which we did about a month ago, where we just relaxed together. We're even silent together, but we were calming our stress together. And so there's little moments of doing that with some skills. There's the bigger moments of doing that. And that once we began to practice that, we were able to connect on a deeper level, especially as my system began to calm down and resolve. Because we know that stress does so many things to a marriage, including lowering libido. And so it's just the little things throughout the day, but also bigger moments of relaxing together.
Yeah, I like how you kind of talked about that, because there are skills we can learn individually, but, like Dan said, we're all into Dr. Wilder and the Courses material, which talks about interactive joy and the importance of interactive quieting our brains together and relaxing together, the breathing exercises, so all of these things that you're doing involves the big topic of communication, which can be very difficult in neurodiverse marriages and special needs family systems, because we have to talk about what are our priorities and expectations. We have to talk about what brings us joy and what is relaxing to us. And sometimes in the chronic stress cycles and the get up and got to do and the Groundhog Day, it's not going to take care of itself. Communication can break down. And listeners, if you followed our show, we love the book, Thanks for the Feedback. And you guys talk about, I think it's around page 81, that some of the tips you give for communication, which too I want to highlight. I want to ask you to talk more about communication, but also, which is supported in the research of Thanks for the Feedback that you mentioned, is first of all, one topic at a time. Don't switch track and bring everything in like, oh, I got him on the couch. We're going to throw everything at this person while I got him sitting here, right? So one topic at a time, and then naming the topic. Like we maybe need to have a protocol topic. What's working, what's not, or we need to have a budget talk. We need to have how are we going to relax this week talk. So those are two that really stuck out to me, because we've also taught those principles and is highly supported in research by Stone and Heen. So flesh that out a little bit more in this chapter when you're talking about the importance of communication, the things you learned along the way that you want to pass on to our listeners.
Yeah, so when families have an additional need, there's more to talk about. And we also have less time to talk. And those conversations can also be more intense, especially when they're about our child. And the practical, logistical, as you said, protocol or schedule or who's going to do this or that can dominate the time that we have to talk and actually talk on a deeper level as a couple. So we realized, one, yes, naming the talk, looking at which kinds of conversations dominate the time we actually do have to talk, and how can we make those extra conversations about what our child needs more efficient and effective in order to still have time to focus on building intimacy in the marriage. And so, we label those conversations of this needs to be just a really quick calendar talk, and there's ways to reorganize your calendar to make those conversations not have to last as long, so we can have the deeper either problem solving, as you said, like a budget, or the how do we want to grow and dream together in our relationship.
What about for you, Todd, having these different conversations and, kind of come across, we've already kind of talked about your disposition as to fix it and solve it, and let's talk about it for the sake of solving the problem. What did you have to shift in your thinking from these are all, everything's a problem solving discussion, to taking these by topic and addressing a different type of skill to each kind of topic? What was that like for you to kind of unpack and learn?
It's kind of like something that in some ways it still fits into that fix-it mentality, but in a good way, because it's like, okay, now I know there's these other kind of conversation types, and I can try to work on having those conversations. So it's still a somewhat of, I want to fix things, but it's now I have better skills and tools to do it, because I know there's other conversation types. We don't have to have just the schedule for the day conversation. We can have some of these deeper conversations, and that's okay, and I can have them. What we found is that when you start focusing in on, as you called it, not switching tracks, when you focus in on the one conversation, you can go a lot deeper with it, because you're not jumping all over the place, and you're able to get to a higher level of thinking, a higher level of connection with each other, and to talk through some things. We mentioned already about changing careers. That's a conversation that we probably wouldn't have had if we hadn't devoted the time, stayed on track, and said, let's focus on what it is and where our family is right now, and what do we dream of? What do we hope for? And kind of revolving around that question of this is where our family is. What is the best we can do with what we have right now? And that started that conversation, and able to go a lot deeper, I think, than we might have otherwise.
I like that. It's kind of going back to, and I like to say too, we're not lowering our expectations. We're changing our expectations to who we are, what we have now, what our resources are, the skills we have, the skills we need to learn, and we might need to keep kind of changing those expectations as the situation change, as the child is aging or the marriage is changing. We're constantly looking at, probably going back. I don't remember if your book said this. I'm going to assume maybe you might have to keep going back and checking that back. What do we need for this leg of the journey? This part of the hike is different than that part of the hike. So I might pack for that journey differently. Dan, switch us our conversation. I want to spend a good a few minutes on this, and our time is running out. I can't believe we've already been talking for almost an hour. But chapter 9 is pretty important. So Dan, I want to have you switch our conversation for us.
All right. So this might seem a little off topic based on what the title of the of our podcast is today, but chapter 9 talks about sexual intimacy, and that overlaps a lot in what we see in our coaching practice. There's a high degree of sex and or porn addiction, and you mentioned in that chapter that porn is a barrier to sexual intimacy, and betrayal and deception needs explicit intentional recovery to be taken seriously. So let's sit here on this topic a little bit and explore what you've got going on in this chapter.
Yeah, I think it's something that's sometimes hard to talk about, and we feel embarrassment over talking about sexual things. But it is, as we all know, just a gift from God. And like any gift, it can be a good or a bad thing. And it can be that way in our marriage. We talk about all the stuff we've previously mentioned today about the emotional connections and things like that. And those are a huge piece of our intimacy and our sexual connections as well. If we're not doing well in those areas, we're not going to connect intimately very well either. And so what the alternative becomes for many couples is to seek that elsewhere in pornography or other things like that. And it can be a challenge. It's like, my wife or my husband isn't meeting those needs for me, and I need something more. And so you try to, just take that for yourself and to provide that need because your spouse isn't. Or maybe it's even from a less selfish way and saying, my wife can't do that right now. She's just not in a place that she can connect. We can't connect intimately. I don't want to bother her with this. She's got so much going on. I can do something else. And so, I think it can be a real problem. And the biggest thing is when you take that piece out of the equation, you're not allowing your spouse to be a part of what you're designed for, of this connection on both the emotional, physical, and spiritual levels. It can be a real issue, and it can really break things down. For what's going on in your marriage. You can feel hurt by it. And, I remember thinking I don't understand. This is a need. I'm a guy. I have these needs. Why can't my wife understand that? But then what I found out kind of later on was oftentimes it could be two things going on. One, was the emotional hurt and pain that she could not process and be that. And so I had to learn to be patient and to help her with time and patience, but also talking through some of the emotional side so that she would eventually be able to engage in more intimate things, not necessarily sex, but even kissing or holding hands or things like that can help contribute to it. But the second thing we discovered was oftentimes it was just a physical problem in terms of in our household, we have a baby monitor. We're never away from our child. It's very hard to detach and engage with your spouse when you have a responsibility, when you're always on. And that baby monitor was there, anytime she could cry out. And so we physically didn't have the situation set up to be able to even have intimacy. So I think there's a couple levels to look at as you kind of look at how do you have healthy sexual and intimate relationships. One is that whole emotional and side along with it. But the second is just what things and barriers come in the way that you may not even be thinking of that can hurt it, and address those, both those areas, and maybe you can lead to something healthier that helps lessen the attraction of pornography or other sexual temptations that are out there.
It's interesting on that. Let's tie this back a little bit to the communication. So communication, the way we talked about it a minute ago, was a lot of what we said. We didn't say anything about what we didn't say. And in this particular topic, what we don't say is extremely important, because when you don't express, I would like to, or can we sit on the couch and hold hands, whatever that is, it can kind of build up. It can create a life of its own given long enough. So what was that like? So I know for me, I stuff, right? I'm not going to express. My natural tendency is to be a recluse, to shut up even more. And sometimes, everybody's wired a little bit differently, but did you see that? I mean, were you ready to close up from a expression perspective, especially on something as mentally intimate as this?
I think definitely it was, I didn't know, didn't feel comfortable to speak up and say, I feel like there's something missing here, in our relationship. God gave us sex and it's been a while, that's embarrassing to say. But also you're afraid of how your spouse is going to react to that. And so you just don't even want to bring it up. And so oftentimes there's this fear of what's going to happen if I say it. She's going to be mad at me. It's going to be even worse. Then it'll be even longer before we ever can get intimate again and all. But what I found, I guess, is that, when I was willing to openly share that and say, I'm really in an open way, not just demanding, but just saying, it's been a while. I'm really wondering what's going on. This is important to me. And approach it more that way. I found when I do it that way, Kristin is much more open to responding in a similar way of saying, that's where we found out some of these logistical things of she just was willing to open to me and say, what, I understand that you have these needs. Here's some of the things I'm struggling with. I'm having a hard time with the grief, and I can't engage with that. It's very difficult for me. I can't get my mind away from this when I'm in the house and things. And so she was willing to kind of openly share those things because I started the conversation being open as well about my own feelings without being demanding. So I feel like it opened the door for those deeper conversations to honestly express the feelings, even if it feels that it's embarrassing or afraid of that reaction you might get.
Yeah, I want to give it to you, Kristin, because a lot of the Christian marriage books that are out there, I call them the Christian neurotypical utopia that doesn't exist for anyone books, but they're definitely making an assumption that two people are the same brain type. You don't have trauma in your family. You don't have special needs in your family. Like, follow these 3 things and you will have the best sex life ever. And then you have all these additional challenges. And then a lot of the books put a lot of heaviness on the wife that if you don't do these things, your husband's going to have a porn problem and he's going to have an affair on you. And it's like, what about my emotional needs? That's kind of where we started at the beginning. You were like, the emotional needs were breaking down. My emotional needs are as equal to your physical needs. So how did you bring those things up? Because it sounds like, Todd, you came to a point, it's not a demand. It's we've got to figure out this together. So talk about that need for you, the emotional needs, and what needed to happen for you to get back to where you could be more physically intimate.
I think you make a really good point. With the exception of one I can think of, Christian books and the message we receive from the church is it's the wife's fault. And also that only men engage in pornography, which there are women too, actually more than people think. So if a woman is receiving that message, which I internalized, that I'm not being a good wife, basically, the focus is on the husband's needs, and the wife just needs to put all of her needs aside. And, as Todd said, I had that chronic stress response. And if I was in the house, I just could not mentally even think about that. My body could not relax. And it was when we began to rebuild that trust emotionally, when Todd did begin to ask, okay, what is going on? And it took a lot of work to, one, rebuild that trust emotionally, but 2, find the time to have those positive emotional interactions throughout the day to build that desire for me. And so we did begin to talk about both sides of it and work together on coming up with a solution. And part of that was getting out of the house together. That's actually been a major piece. Even if it's just 5 miles away, going to a hotel for a couple nights, that has been a tremendous factor in rebuilding that part of our marriage. But there's 2 sides, and Christian books often make it seem one-sided. But it's not the wife's fault or the other spouse in either case. And it takes building that time together, a big full picture of how that can rebuild in a marriage.
Well, we only got to hit the highlights of the book. So I want to make sure we end with you guys telling people how to build a thriving marriage with children with disabilities. Again, what I appreciated about it was it's more than a story. There's research, there's practical tips and guidelines. And, I know from my perspective, when Dan and I were kind of struggling in our early marriage with our child with needs, people just saying, well, just do this. And I'm like, okay, that's nice and all, but again, childcare, how is this going to happen? But when you hear it from someone who's lived it, experienced it, and has come up with some problem solving, it's far more impactful than some, Dr. Joe Smith, who's never done this and they've written a book because, they just heard a lot of stories from their practice. So I want to end us with telling us about anything that people can connect to you, either your site, do you have courses, classes, how to get the book? Just take this time to let people know how to connect with you.
Yeah, so our website is disabilityparenting.com, and we have created lots of free professional resources, worksheets you can download, guides, everything from marriage to self-care, micro self-care moments throughout the day, processing your faith and grief. So we have all those free resources. The book is available pretty much anywhere books and ebooks are sold. So Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, Baker Books has the book on their site. And we're on Instagram, Disability Parenting. And what we encourage couples is, we know you don't have a lot of time. We don't want the book to seem overwhelming. We encourage couples to pick one chapter and one skill in that chapter and work on that. We don't want you to feel stressed and overwhelmed by the book, for sure. We know, and that's why we try to make it really practical to just build one of those skills, start to work on that together, and you'll start to see a big difference.
Anything you'd like to add as we are kind of closing the show today, Todd?
No, just thanks for having us on. And like we said, our heart is for families and couples that are kind of struggling through this difficulties in their life. But remember that oftentimes these difficulties lead to the most beautiful things, that we've been amazed how God has brought us, and as we've trusted in him, as we've worked together with each other. And we think that everyone can have a piece of that, and just encourage you that even if you are in the midst of the worst part of your life, it can build into something beautiful and be the core of something new.
All right. Well, with that, we'll be closing today. We'd like to remind you, listeners, that there is hope for your future. You're not alone for your journey. And for those who follow us as a neurodiverse Christian couple, we have our classes open for spring. You want to go to www.christianneurodiversemarriage.com. There are groups for men. There are groups led by me, and those tend to fill fast. So email us, contact us if you would like to be in one of our marriage groups. And then please reach out to Todd and Kristin if you are also on a special needs parenting journey. So we look forward to joining you again next time. Bye.